The unforgiving sun beat down on the borderlands as Sarah Winters discovered the unthinkable, a young Apache boy, no more than 18, bound to a cottonwood tree. Dried blood caked his bronze skin, his eyes vacant yet somehow still alive. 3 days he'd been there, according to the tracks around him. 3 days of vultures circling, of coyotes prowling, of the merciless desert sun blistering his skin. She had been wandering for months, running from ghosts of her own. Now, cutting through his ropes with trembling hands, she made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. In a land where most saw only savages, she saw a human being deserving of dignity. What forces had brought these two broken souls together in this vast emptiness? What invisible thread connected their wounded hearts? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Winters had not always been a wanderer of desolate borderlands. Once, she commanded a classroom of eager children in Boston, her voice gentle yet authoritative as she guided young minds through the wonders of literature and mathematics. Her husband James, a respected physician, would listen with pride as she recounted her students' progress over evening meals. Their daughter Emily, with her father's warm eyes and her mother's determination, filled their brownstone with laughter and questions that never seemed to end. That life ended in the winter of 1874. The smallpox came swiftly and without mercy. James, exposed while treating patients, brought the disease home unwittingly. Emily succumbed first, her small body unable to fight the ravaging fever. James followed 3 days later, calling Sarah's name through cracked, bleeding lips before slipping away. Sarah, somehow spared, was left alone in a house suddenly too large, too quiet, too empty. The locket around her neck held all that remained. A small portrait of Emily at 7, painted just months before her death. Some days, Sarah could barely bring herself to open it. Other days, she couldn't bear to close it. She tried to continue teaching, but each child's face reminded her of what she had lost. The sympathetic glances from colleagues became unbearable. The whispers, "Poor Sarah Winters," followed her through Boston's cobblestone streets until she could no longer breathe the air of a city filled with memories. Her father had left her enough money to live modestly. With nothing holding her in Boston, Sarah boarded a westbound train in 1875. She had no destination in mind, only a desperate need to escape the ghost of her former life. The Arizona Territory wasn't her intended home. She had planned to continue to California, but something about the harsh, unforgiving landscape spoke to the emptiness within her. In Tucson, she found temporary work tending to children of prominent families. In Tombstone, she nursed minors suffering from lung ailments. Each town welcomed her skills but never her heart. She remained apart, untethered. Sarah's knowledge of medicine, learned at her father's side and expanded through her husband's books, made her valuable in frontier communities where doctors were scarce. She developed a reputation as a healer who combined formal education with herbal remedies learned from Mexican women and, occasionally, Native Americans willing to share their knowledge. But the restlessness never left her. Each new town eventually became another place to leave behind. The respectable widow gradually transformed into something frontier folk eyed with suspicion, a woman alone, neither seeking remarriage nor settling into any community. 6 months ago, she had packed her few possessions and walked away from the mining camp that had been her most recent shelter. Some called it suicide to wander the borderlands alone. Perhaps they were right. Sarah herself wasn't certain whether she sought a new beginning or merely an end to her pain, until she found the boy tied to the cottonwood tree. The ropes fell away, and the boy collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. Sarah caught him before his head struck the hard-packed earth, lowering him gently. His breath came in shallow gasps, his skin burning with fever despite the cooling evening air. Sarah worked methodically, falling back on years of experience. From her worn leather satchel, her medicine bundle as she had come to think of it, She withdrew a canteen of water, clean cloths, and a small tin of salve made from beeswax and native plants. This routine of healing was familiar, a stark contrast to the unfamiliar territory of helping an Apache youth. "You're safe now," she whispered, though she doubted he could hear. "I won't hurt you." She dampened a cloth and wiped dried blood from his face, revealing high cheekbones and a strong jaw. Beneath the dirt and crusted blood, she discovered traditional tattoos marking his chin and forehead, unmistakable signs of his Apache heritage. She'd seen such markings in sketches from government reports and sensationalist newspaper accounts of savage raiders. Those same newspapers would call her a fool or worse for helping him. Settlers in these territories lived in fear of Apache attacks, just as the Apache feared the ever-advancing tide of white encroachment. The military's brutal campaigns against native tribes were justified as necessary protection for American citizens. Sarah had heard the stories in every frontier town, tales of massacres, scalping, torture. Yet here was not a fearsome warrior but a boy, brutalized and abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on her. His wounds told a story of methodical cruelty. Lash marks crossed his back in precise rows. Bruises in various stages of healing suggested repeated beatings over days. His wrists were raw and infected where the ropes had cut deep. Most concerning was the dehydration. Lips cracked and bleeding, skin hot and dry to the touch. Sarah couldn't move him yet. She would need to make camp here, beneath the cottonwood tree that had been both his prison and his shelter. The branches had provided some protection from the merciless sun, perhaps the only mercy his captors had unwittingly granted. She worked through the night, applying poultices to infected wounds, coaxing small sips of water between his lips, monitoring his fever. Her mind drifted to her husband James, who had taught her to stitch wounds and reduce fevers, to her father, who had shown her which plants could heal and which could harm, to the Mexican curandera in Tucson who had expanded her knowledge of desert remedies. Near dawn, the boy's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, there was only confusion in those dark eyes. Then came recognition, not of her but of his situation, followed immediately by terror. He thrashed weakly, trying to escape despite his condition. "Shoo!" Sarah soothed, keeping her distance but speaking calmly. "No one will hurt you here." He froze, eyes darting from her face to her hands, searching for threat. Sarah remained still, letting him assess her. Finally, his gaze fixed on the canteen beside her. Sarah nodded, understanding. She offered the water without moving closer. After a long moment, need overcame fear, and he reached for it with trembling hands. Small victories, Sarah thought. They would begin with water, the most basic need. The rest would come with time. Dawn broke with gentle persistence, painting the desert in hues of amber and rose. Sarah had dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, every movement from the boy. Now he was fully awake, sitting with his back against the cottonwood, watching her with wary eyes. Sarah reached for her canteen, moving slowly to avoid startling him. "Water," she said, offering it first to show her intent. She took a small sip, then extended it toward him. "For you." He accepted it cautiously, keeping his eyes on her as he drank. His movements were more controlled today, his gaze clearer. The night's care had made a difference. "Food?" she asked, retrieving dried meat and hardtack from her pack. Again, she demonstrated by taking a small bite before offering it to him. The boy studied the food for a long moment before accepting it. He ate with deliberate slowness, as if uncertain when he might eat again. "My name is Sarah," she said, touching her chest. "Sarah Winters." The boy gave no response, though his eyes tracked her movements carefully. "Hablas español?" she tried, hoping her rudimentary Spanish might bridge the gap between them. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. Not fluency, perhaps, but some understanding. "Quien te hizo esto?" she asked, gesturing to his wounds. "Who did this to you?" He stared at the ground, his jaw tightening. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough from disuse. Hombres. Rancho. Men. Ranch. Sarah nodded encouragingly. Por qué? Why? Caballo, he said. Horse. Then made a gesture of something being taken. They thought you stole a horse? Sarah pieced together, reverting to English in her surprise. The boy shook his head vehemently. No robar. Not steal. Sarah believed him. The punishment had been far too severe for even a guilty man, let alone one who might be innocent. Your name? She asked, touching her chest again and saying Sarah. Then pointing to him. His face went blank, shoulders stiffening. He looked away. Sarah tried again. Nombre? No nombre, he said flatly. No name. The concept seemed impossible to Sarah. Everyone had a name. Your family must call you something. No familia. No family. His expression remained impassive, but pain flashed briefly in his eyes. Then I will call you. Sarah paused, considering. Niño? Boy. A slight grimace crossed his face. Not a name he appreciated. Sarah smiled despite herself. It was the first clear preference he had expressed. Progress. As she prepared a fresh poultice for his wounds, she noticed him watching her hands intently. She began narrating her actions in simple terms, pointing to each plant and naming it. Sage. Yucca. Aloe. When she misidentified a desert plant, he made a small sound of disagreement. She looked up, surprised. He pointed to the plant and said an Apache word she couldn't possibly pronounce. You know medicines? She asked. He nodded once, a hint of pride surfacing briefly through his stoic demeanor. Sarah offered him the plant. Show me. His hands moved with surprising deftness, separating the useful parts from those that weren't. He demonstrated how to extract the inner gel more efficiently than her method. In this small exchange of knowledge, something shifted between them. They were no longer merely rescuer and victim, but two people with something to offer one another. That night, as stars blanketed the vast desert sky, Sarah made a decision. The ranchers might return to check their handiwork. They needed to move somewhere safer, somewhere they could continue this fragile process of healing and communication. What had begun as a simple act of mercy was becoming something more complex, something for which Sarah had no name. Not yet. The distant thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning stillness. Sarah jolted awake, her hand instinctively reaching for the boy's shoulder to quiet any movement. His eyes were already open, body tense as a drawn bowstring. Riders, she whispered unnecessarily. He had heard them before she had. Sarah scrambled to gather their meager belongings, stuffing medicines and food into her pack with practiced efficiency. The boy attempted to stand, stumbling as his weakened legs betrayed him. Pride flashed across his face, followed by determination. He tried again, succeeding by bracing himself against the cottonwood. We need to move, Sarah said, gesturing north toward the foothills. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, a crude map she had sketched during her wanderings, marking water sources and shelters. Cave, she said, pointing to a location roughly 2 miles away. The boy shook his head and made a pushing motion toward her. His meaning was clear. She should go alone. No, Sarah said firmly. Together. She tapped her chest, then linked her fingers. Together. For a moment, he seemed ready to argue, then nodded once. Survival trumped pride. They moved slowly at first, the boy's steps unsteady but growing stronger with each yard. Sarah matched his pace, staying close enough to catch him if needed, but giving him space to maintain dignity. The hoofbeats grew louder, then faded as the riders changed direction. Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The terrain grew increasingly difficult as they approached the foothills. Jagged rocks replaced sand and scrub, requiring careful navigation. The boy stumbled several times, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. Blood seeped through the back of his tattered shirt, but he made no sound of complaint. Sarah found herself questioning her actions with each labored step. Why risk her life for this stranger? What obligation bound her to his fate? The questions echoed in her mind until Emily's voice answered them, a memory so clear it might have been spoken aloud. Helping others is how we help ourselves, Mama. Her daughter's simple wisdom, offered years ago when bringing soup to a sick neighbor, now guided Sarah through a wilderness where kindness was as rare as water. By midday, the boy's strength was flagging. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. Just as Sarah was about to insist they rest, he pointed ahead. "Ahi," he said softly. There. The cave entrance was nearly invisible, concealed by an outcropping of rock and desert brush. Without the boy's guidance, Sarah would have walked past it. They approached cautiously, Sarah half expecting to find it occupied by wildlife or worse. Inside, the temperature dropped, immediately providing blessed relief from the punishing sun. The boy moved with surprising confidence through the darkness, leading Sarah deeper until they reached a chamber where a shaft of light penetrated from some opening above. Sarah gasped. The walls were adorned with ancient paintings, handprints, animals, and abstract symbols in reds and ochres. The boy touched the images reverently, murmuring words she couldn't understand. This place held meaning for his people. He guided her to a hidden alcove where they could rest unseen from the cave entrance. As they settled, the distant sound of horses passing reached them. The boy tensed, but Sarah placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "They can't find us here." He nodded, his expression conveying what his limited Spanish could not. This would be their sanctuary for now. In the filtered light, Sarah studied the hand-drawn map that had guided them here. They were far from any settlement, in a no-man's land claimed by neither white men nor Apache. Perhaps that made it the safest place for them both. A week passed in the quiet rhythm of their cave dwelling. Sarah's medical knowledge and the boy's surprising familiarity with the surrounding terrain created an effective partnership. She tended his wounds, which healed a little more each day. He showed her which plants were safe to gather, where clean water could be found, how to move without leaving obvious tracks. Their communication remained limited but improving. Sarah practiced the few Apache words he taught her, mostly names of plants and animals. He absorbed her Spanish and occasional English with remarkable quickness, though he spoke rarely and briefly. One afternoon, while exploring deeper recesses of the cave system, Sarah discovered an ancient clay bowl, perfectly preserved and nestled in a natural stone shelf. She carried it carefully back to their main chamber, where the boy examined it with evident recognition. "Apache?" Sarah asked. He nodded. "Old ones. Before." He made a sweeping gesture indicating great time had passed. That evening, they shared a meal of rabbit stew cooked in the clay bowl over a small, smokeless fire. The simple act of eating from the same vessel created a moment of domestic normalcy that neither had experienced in a long time. As they ate, Sarah tried again. "I need to call you something," she said, tapping her chest. "Sarah." Then pointing to him, ? The familiar shuddered look crossed his face. "No nombre," he repeated, as he had each time before. "Everyone needs a name," Sarah persisted gently. She tried a different approach. "I was named for my grandmother, Sarah Hutchins. She was a teacher like me. My daughter was named Emily, after my husband's mother." She opened the locket she always wore, showing him the tiny portrait inside. "Emily," she said, her voice softening on the syllables. The boy studied the image, then looked at Sarah with new understanding. "Muerte," he said quietly. "Dead." Sarah nodded, closing the locket. "Yes, but her name lives. Names are important. They connect us to those who came before and those who will come after." The boy was silent for a long moment, staring into the small fire. Finally he spoke, his voice barely audible. "No familia, no nombre. No family, no name. Something broke in Sarah's heart. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and touched his hand, their first physical contact that wasn't about medical treatment. "Then I will give you a name," she said, "and be your family." He looked up, surprise evident in his dark eyes. Sarah considered carefully. "Thomas," she said finally. "It was my father's name, Thomas Hutchins. He was a good man, strong and kind." The boy tilted his head, as if testing the sound of it in his mind. "Thomas means twin in an ancient language," Sarah explained. "It seems right for us. Two people alone, finding each other." He didn't respond immediately, and Sarah worried she had overstepped. But that night, as she pretended to sleep, she heard him whispering to himself in the darkness, practicing the unfamiliar name, "Thomas, Thomas, Thomas." The next morning, as they prepared to check their snares, he stood before her with unusual directness. He pointed to himself and said clearly, "Thomas." Sarah's eyes filled with unexpected tears. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. What had begun as rescue became covenant. She had given him more than a name. She had given him the possibility of a future. And in doing so, perhaps she had given herself one as well. 2 weeks in the cave, and Thomas's body was healing faster than his spirit. The nights revealed what daylight concealed. His sleep was fractured by terrors that sent him bolt upright, words in Apache tumbling from his lips, eyes wide but seeing something far away and long ago. The first time it happened, Sarah woke to his cries, disoriented in the darkness. She approached cautiously, speaking his name in soft, steady repetition until recognition returned to his eyes. She didn't ask what he had seen. Some wounds weren't meant to be probed. By day, they established routines that created a semblance of normalcy. Thomas regained strength through increasing forays outside the cave. Sarah marveled at his innate understanding of the desert. He moved through the landscape with the ease of one born to it, teaching her to read signs she would have missed. Disturbed pebbles indicating animal tracks, subtle changes in vegetation signaling water nearby. One afternoon, Sarah watched as Thomas knelt by a stream, carefully selecting stones. His fingers worked with remarkable precision, napping the edges until they formed perfect arrowheads. He fashioned shafts from straight branches, attaching feathers with sinew he had preserved from their meals. "You are skilled at this," Sarah observed. Thomas looked up, a rare half-smile briefly crossing his face. "My grandfather taught," he said, his English improving daily. "Before soldiers came." It was the first reference he had made to his past that wasn't prompted by her questions. Sarah kept her tone casual, fearing too much interest might cause him to retreat into silence again. "Your grandfather must have been a great hunter." Thomas nodded. "Best in our band." He continued working, then added unexpectedly, "He died when I was 12. Soldiers attacked our camp." Sarah sat beside him, not too close, giving him space to continue or stop as he wished. "My mother already gone. Sickness." His hands stilled on the arrowhead. "Father tried to keep me safe. We became separated in the fighting." "What happened then?" Sarah asked gently when his silence stretched. "Other families took me in. Apache way." His fingers resumed their skilled work. "But never truly belonged. Always outsider." He looked at her directly. "Until tree." The simple statement held complex meaning. Until the tree, until the worst moment of his life, he had never found acceptance. The cruelty that had nearly killed him had, through Sarah's intervention, finally given him connection. "The men who hurt you," Sarah ventured carefully, "why did they believe you stole their horse?" Thomas's expression darkened. "They need no reason. Apache is enough." That night, the nightmare came again, more violent than before. Thomas thrashed against invisible bonds, Apache words mingling with broken Spanish. Sarah recognized madre and padre, mother, father, and one word repeated with particular anguish, Delgadito. When Thomas finally woke, trembling and disoriented, Sarah offered him water without comment. They sat in silence as his breathing steadied. "Who is Delgadito?" she asked when he seemed calm enough. Thomas went still, his face unreadable in the darkness. For a moment, Sarah thought he wouldn't answer. "A chief," he said finally. "My people." Sarah sensed there was more, but she didn't press. Trust was a tender seedling between them, easily uprooted by digging too deeply too soon. Instead, she shared a piece of her own pain. "I have nightmares too," she admitted. "I see my daughter's face as the fever took her. I hear my husband calling my name as he died." Thomas studied her, his dark eyes reflecting the faint moonlight filtering into the cave. "You lost your people too." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. In this understanding of mutual loss, they found unexpected common ground. Different worlds, different tragedies, but the same hollow space carved by absence. A month passed, each day bringing more strength to Thomas's body and more words to his vocabulary. They ventured farther from the cave, mapping the surrounding terrain and establishing hunting grounds. The boundaries of their world expanded cautiously, like ripples in a still pond. One clear morning, they climbed a rocky ridge that offered views across the valley. The distant glint of something metallic caught Sarah's eye. She squinted against the sun, then felt Thomas tense beside her. "Soldiers," he whispered, his body instinctively lowering to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. Sarah followed his gaze. A cavalry patrol moved along the valley floor, perhaps 2 miles away. The sound of a bugle carried faintly across the distance, a brassy note that seemed to pierce Thomas physically. His breathing quickened, hands clenching into fists. "We should return," she said softly. Thomas nodded, already backing away from the ridge. They descended in silence, moving with the caution of prey animals. Only when they were safely inside the cave did Thomas's posture relax slightly. Sarah studied him in the filtered light. "It's time you told me about the men who hurt you," she said gently but firmly. "We need to know what we're facing." Thomas sat cross-legged by their small fire pit, his face partly in shadow. For a long moment, Sarah thought he might refuse, retreat into the silence that had been his protection for so long. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "Blackwood Ranch," he said. "Biggest spread north of the border. Preston Blackwood owns it." Sarah recognized the name immediately. Blackwood's cattle empire was legendary in the territory. Rumors of his political ambitions had reached even the remote settlements where she had worked. His name appeared frequently in territorial newspapers, always cast as a visionary bringing civilization to the frontier. "I worked there," Thomas continued, "for food, cleaning stables, digging ditches, work no white man wanted." "They hired an Apache?" Sarah asked, surprised. Most ranchers considered all Apache as enemies, regardless of whether they were peaceful or hostile bands. "Not hired. They let me work. No pay." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Better than starving." "What happened with the horse?" "Blackwood's son, Evan. His prized stallion went missing. He said I took it." Thomas's eyes met hers directly. "I did not." "I believe you," Sarah assured him. "Doesn't matter what is true. Matters who is believed." Thomas's statement held the weight of bitter experience. "They dragged me to town." Blackwood said, "Make an example. Show what happens to thieving Apache." He described the public beating in emotionless detail, how Blackwood's foreman had used a bullwhip while townspeople watched, how the son had insisted they leave him tied to die as a warning to others. No one had intervened. No one had questioned. "Preston Blackwood wants to be governor," Thomas added, the first hint of anger creeping into his voice. "Says he will solve the Apache problem once and for all." Sarah had heard such rhetoric before, politicians promising to eliminate the Indian menace to secure settler votes. She'd seen the consequences: forced relocations, starvation on reservations, military campaigns that made no distinction between peaceful families and raiding parties. "The horse," she asked, "was it ever found?" "Mountain lions spooked it. Ran off. Came back 2 days after I was tied to tree." Thomas's laugh held no humor. "No one untied me. No one said sorry." The distant bugle sounded again, closer now. Thomas's head snapped toward the cave entrance. "Patrols are increasing," he said, "looking for Apache bands still fighting. Delgadito's people." There was that name again, Delgadito, spoken with a reverence Thomas tried to hide. "This cave is too close to their routes," he continued. "Not safe anymore." Sarah understood the implication. They would need to move, venture deeper into territories she had avoided in her wanderings. Lands still controlled by free Apache bands. "You know somewhere?" she asked. Thomas nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, but dangerous for you. White woman in Apache land." He didn't need to finish. They both understood the risk. Their relative safety had been built on isolation, existing in the margins between two worlds. Now they would need to choose a side. They left the cave before dawn, traveling light and fast. Thomas led the way with newfound confidence. No longer the broken boy Sarah had cut from the tree. Now he moved with purpose, reading the landscape like a familiar book. Their path took them deeper into the Dragoon Mountains, a labyrinth of canyons and ridges that had sheltered Apache bands for generations. As settlements and cavalry patrols fell behind them, Thomas began to share knowledge that had been passed down through countless ancestors. "This plant," he said, stopping beside a tall yucca, "gives everything we need." He demonstrated how to extract the tough fibers for cordage, how to use the sharp tips as natural needles, how the roots could be crushed for soap. Flowers and fruit for food, roots for medicine. Sarah watched, humbled by the realization that her formal education paled against this practical wisdom. "In Boston, I taught children to memorize Latin names for plants they never saw," she said. "You know, how to live with them." Thomas nodded, his expression softening. "Apache way is to take only what is needed. Thank the plant for its gift." He placed his hand briefly on the yucca's base. "All things have spirit." As they continued, their roles reversed completely. Sarah, who had been the caretaker, became the student. Thomas, who had been the victim, became the guide. He showed her how to walk leaving minimal tracks, how to find water where none seemed possible, how to listen to the desert's subtle warnings. "In your classroom," Thomas asked during a brief rest, "what did you teach?" The question surprised Sarah. Thomas rarely initiated conversation about her past. "Reading, writing, arithmetic," she replied. "History, geography, natural philosophy. I had 28 students, ages 6 to 12. Thomas considered this. "You were important teacher?" Sarah smiled at the memory of her modest classroom. "Not important, no. Just one schoolteacher among many." "You taught children to see world differently," Thomas said. "Is important." His simple assertion touched her deeply. In the desert's vastness, her previous life sometimes seemed like a dream, insubstantial against the harsh reality of survival. Yet Thomas saw value in what she had been. Near midday, they encountered their first serious danger. Thomas froze suddenly, motioning for Sarah to stop. A wild boar blocked their path through a narrow canyon, its tusks gleaming dangerously in the sunlight. Before Sarah could react, Thomas had positioned himself between her and the animal, moving with silent efficiency. Using techniques he had explained but she had never witnessed, he diverted the boar without harming it, creating a distraction that allowed them safe passage. The incident lasted less than a minute but demonstrated a lifetime of knowledge. "You saved us," Sarah said when they were safely past. Thomas shrugged. "You saved me first." By late afternoon, they reached their destination. A hidden spring nestled in a protected valley. Ancient cottonwoods surrounded the water source, their shade creating a natural sanctuary. Evidence of previous occupation was visible to Thomas's trained eye. Stone circles from old wickiups, worn grinding stones for processing mesquite beans. My people came here between seasons, he explained. Good water, hidden from enemies. As they established camp, combining her medical supplies with his survival skills, Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen before. Thomas smiled. Not fully, not broadly, but a slight upward turn of his lips as he worked. It transformed his face, softening the hardness that suffering had carved there. That night, as they sat beneath stars that seemed close enough to touch, Sarah realized she hadn't thought about dying in weeks. The desperate emptiness that had driven her into the wilderness had receded, replaced by the immediate concerns of survival and, unexpectedly, by purpose. Thomas placed another branch on their small fire. Tomorrow I teach you Apache words, he said. You taught many children. Now I teach you. Sarah nodded, recognizing the gift he offered. Not just knowledge but trust, inclusion in his world. They had become something neither could have imagined when she found him tied to that cottonwood tree. Family forged by necessity, strengthened by mutual respect. I would be honored, she replied, using a formal Apache phrase he had taught her earlier. Thomas's hint of a smile returned, acknowledgement of her correct usage. In that moment, surrounded by wilderness that would kill the unwary, they had found something rare and precious, a place where both belonged. 3 months of desert living had transformed them both. Sarah's skin had darkened to a deep tan, her hands toughened by work. Thomas had filled out, his frame stronger, his movements confident. Their supplies, however, were dwindling. Ammunition for Sarah's small revolver was nearly gone. Their coffee had been carefully rationed to the last beans. Some necessities simply couldn't be harvested from the land. We need salt, Sarah said one evening as they inventoried their remaining supplies. And flour, if possible. Thomas nodded, his expression troubled. O'Malley's trading post. 2 days' journey. He trades with Apache sometimes. Is it safe? Sarah asked. For you, yes. For me. Thomas gestured to his distinctive facial tattoos. These mark me. After careful deliberation, they formed a plan. Thomas cut his hair shorter, in a style more common among Mexican laborers. Sarah fashioned a wide-brimmed hat that would shadow his face. They created a simple story. Sarah was a widow traveling with her mute nephew, a half-Mexican boy who helped her gather herbs for medicines. The journey to O'Malley's required heightened vigilance. They traveled mostly at dawn and dusk, avoiding the main trails. When they finally glimpsed the trading post, a low adobe building with a corral and storage shed, they watched from a distance before approaching, counting the horses to determine how many customers might be inside. Only 2 horses, Thomas reported. Good time. Sarah adjusted Thomas's hat one last time. Remember, not a word. If anyone speaks to you, I look to you. I am simple boy who cannot speak. Thomas's eyes held a hint of irony. I have played this role before. The comment revealed yet another layer of his past that Sarah hadn't known. Times when he had hidden his Apache identity to survive among white settlers. She wondered how many such concealments had marked his young life. Inside, the trading post smelled of leather, tobacco, and coffee. A large Irishman with a shock of white hair looked up from behind the counter. His shrewd eyes took in Sarah, then Thomas, lingering briefly on the shadow beneath the boy's hat. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, his accent thick. Seamus O'Malley at your service. Sarah Winters, she replied. My nephew and I are traveling through. We need supplies. O'Malley nodded without pressing for details. That was the way of frontier merchants. Curiosity tempered by discretion. Questions might drive away customers who valued privacy. What can I get you, then? Sarah produced small pouches of dried herbs. I can trade these, medicinal quality. O'Malley examined the herbs with genuine interest. Good echinacea. And this desert sage? Hard to find this clean. He nodded appreciatively. I can give you fair credit for these. As Sarah negotiated, Thomas moved carefully through the store, keeping his face averted from the windows. He paused at a bolt of blue calico fabric, his fingers touching it with unusual interest. Their transaction nearly complete, O'Malley leaned forward and lowered his voice. Word of warning, ma'am. There's been increased Apache activity to the south. Raiding parties hit the Blackwood Ranch twice last month. Thomas stiffened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Blackwood. Cavalry's been dispatched from Fort Bowie. O'Malley continued. They're hunting Delgadito's band. Mean business this time. At the name Delgadito, Thomas's hand froze on the fabric he'd been touching. Sarah moved slightly to block him from O'Malley's view. We'll be careful, she assured the trader. Is there anything else we should know? Aye. Bounty hunters passing through, looking for runaways and renegades. Nasty bunch. O'Malley's gaze flicked briefly to Thomas, then back to Sarah. His next words were carefully measured. Some folks around here don't ask too many questions about who's who or what's what. Man's business is his own, I say. Sarah understood the implicit message. O'Malley suspected something about Thomas but was choosing not to pry or to report. We appreciate your discretion, she said quietly. They completed their transaction, acquiring precious flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, and, at Thomas's silent insistence, a small length of blue calico fabric. As they prepared to leave, hoofbeats approached outside. Back door, O'Malley said quickly, gesturing to a rear exit. Cavalry patrol by the sound of it. They slipped out just as riders dismounted at the front. From the safety of the brush behind the trading post, Thomas watched the soldiers with an intensity that spoke of old terrors. Only when they were miles away did Sarah ask about the blue fabric carefully folded in his pack. My mother, Thomas said simply. She wore blue. Only memory I have of her. The crack of distant gunfire froze them in their tracks. They had been traveling for hours since leaving O'Malley's, keeping to the concealment of arroyos and brush. Thomas immediately dropped to a crouch, pulling Sarah down beside him. Apache and soldiers, he whispered, identifying the distinctive reports of cavalry carbines mixed with the deeper bark of older Apache weapons. They waited in silence as the firing gradually ceased. When no sounds followed for several minutes, they continued with heightened caution, detouring widely around where the conflict had occurred. As they crossed a shallow ravine, Thomas suddenly raised his hand in warning. Sarah followed his gaze to a splash of blue against the red earth, a cavalry uniform. Its wearer lay motionless, blood darkening the dust beneath him. Sarah's medical instincts overrode caution. She approached the fallen soldier, kneeling to check for signs of life. He's alive, she reported, finding a thready pulse. Gunshot wound to the shoulder, lost a lot of blood. Thomas remained at a distance, his body tense. Leave him, he said flatly. Sarah looked up in surprise. He'll die without help. He is enemy. Thomas's voice held no emotion. He would kill me on sight. He's unconscious and bleeding to death, Sarah countered. He's a human being who needs help. Thomas's expression hardened. When your people found wounded Apache, did they help? Or finish killing? The question hung between them, heavy with historical truth Sarah couldn't deny. Atrocities had been committed by both sides in this endless conflict. But her path had been chosen long ago, when she first took an informal oath as a healer. I can't leave him to die, she said firmly. Not if I can help. Thomas paced in agitation, caught between his respect for Sarah and his deep-rooted fear of the uniform. Finally, he made a sharp gesture of frustration. Help him, then we go. Before he wakes and sees me. It was a compromise Sarah could accept. She unpacked her medical supplies while Thomas reluctantly stood guard. The young soldier couldn't have been more than 20. His face still bearing traces of boyhood beneath the grime and blood. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, missing vital structures but causing significant bleeding. Sarah cleaned and dressed the wound with practiced efficiency, applying poultices to prevent infection. Throughout her work, Thomas remained vigilant, dividing his attention between the surrounding terrain and the soldier's unconscious form. As Sarah bandaged the wound, Thomas approached cautiously and knelt to examine something that had fallen from the soldier's pocket. A packet of letters tied with string, and a small brass cavalry badge. "His name is Michael Collins," Sarah said, reading the inscription on a letter. "From Ohio." Thomas said nothing, but slipped the cavalry badge into his own pocket. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "To understand enemy, study what they value." Thomas held up the badge. "This means honor to him, power, his place in the world." He tucked it away. "I will learn from it." Sarah didn't argue. The badge was a small thing compared to what had been taken from Thomas and his people. The soldier stirred slightly, a good sign. "We should go," Sarah said, packing her supplies. "He'll regain consciousness soon." They left water within the soldier's reach and retreated to a ridge where they could observe from a distance. When the young man finally woke, disoriented but alive, Sarah felt the rightness of their action confirmed. Even Thomas seemed less certain in his earlier conviction as they watched the soldier slowly gather his bearings. "He will live," Thomas acknowledged as they finally turned away. "But you know cavalry will say Apache did this to him. Will not say Apache woman helped him." "I'm not Apache," Sarah corrected gently. Thomas gave her a long look. "You live Apache way now. See world with different eyes." He gestured to their surroundings. "Out here you are becoming something new. Not white woman anymore, not Apache. Something between." As they continued their journey, Sarah pondered his words. She had crossed some invisible boundary in recent months. The society she had once belonged to would no longer recognize her, not just in appearance but in how she understood the world. Later that night, Thomas removed the cavalry badge from his pocket, studying it in the firelight. "Man who wore this believes he fights for right cause," he said thoughtfully. "And you?" Sarah asked. "I fight to exist," Thomas replied simply. "Different fight." 6 months had passed since Sarah cut Thomas from the cottonwood tree. The seasons had turned, bringing cooler nights to their hidden valley. Their camp had evolved into something resembling a home, a brush shelter constructed with Thomas's expertise, a stone-ringed fire pit, a place for each of their few possessions. One evening, Thomas presented Sarah with something he had been working on secretly, a silver hair comb crafted from materials gathered during their travels. The design featured intricate patterns reminiscent of the cave paintings they had seen months ago. "Apache men make gifts for family," he explained, offering it with a formality that spoke of cultural significance. "To honor, to protect." Sarah accepted it with equal solemnity, recognizing the deeper meaning beneath the gesture. This wasn't merely a gift. It was a declaration of belonging. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the careful workmanship. "Thank you, Thomas." That night, as firelight cast dancing shadows across their camp, the barriers between their separate pasts seemed to thin. Perhaps it was the gift, perhaps the growing chill that pushed them closer to the flames, or perhaps simply the time that had passed. But something prompted Sarah to speak of things she rarely mentioned. "My husband was the first to fall ill," she said, her voice soft against the night sounds. "He was a doctor. There was an outbreak of smallpox in Boston. He treated the sick while I kept Emily away, trying to protect her." Her fingers found the locket at her neck. "It didn't matter. He brought it home without knowing. Emily died first, then James 3 days later." Thomas listened without interruption, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I wanted to die too," Sarah continued. I walked west hoping something would kill me. Exposure, bandits, wild animals. When none did, I kept walking. Until I found you. Thomas added a branch to the fire, sparks spiraling upward like fleeing spirits. The silence stretched comfortably between them until he spoke. I am not just any Apache, he said finally, his voice low but clear. My father is Delgadito. Sarah stilled, the name immediately recognizable from newspaper accounts and O'Malley's warning. Delgadito, one of the last free Apache leaders, feared by settlers, respected by military opponents for his tactical brilliance, hunted by the cavalry. How? She asked simply. When I was 12, soldiers attacked our camp. Thomas's gaze fixed on the flames. Many died. In confusion, I became separated from my father. A family from another band found me, took me with them when they fled. My father believed I died that day. You never tried to find him? Many times. Apache bands move constantly to survive. Messages between groups are difficult. His hands worked a piece of sinew, a habit when he was deep in thought. 2 years ago, I heard stories of my father's band. They were in mountains north of Mexico. I tried to reach them, but was caught by soldiers. Sent to reservation at San Carlos. You escaped. Thomas nodded. After 1 year, found work where I could. At Blackwood Ranch. He paused, the memory still raw. The horse I was accused of stealing. I planned to use it to find my father's band. Would have returned it after. The revelation shifted Sarah's understanding of everything. Thomas wasn't just an anonymous victim of frontier brutality. He was the son of a leader whose name inspired fear throughout the territory. Does he still search for you? She asked. Perhaps. Or perhaps he honors my memory as dead. Thomas met her gaze directly. But I have chosen different path now. Because of me? Because of us, he corrected. You gave me name, place, purpose. Different from my father's way, but mine now. In the silence that followed, Sarah understood the magnitude of his choice. He had set aside the chance to reclaim his heritage, his birthright as the son of a chief, to remain with her. What is your Apache name? She asked quietly. Thomas shook his head. That boy is gone. I am Thomas now. 8 months of desert living had forged a rhythm to their days. Thomas departed each morning to check snares and hunt, while Sarah gathered plants and maintained their camp. They rarely spent more than a few hours apart, a practical arrangement in dangerous territory that had become a comfortable habit. When Thomas didn't return by midday, Sarah felt the first twinge of unease. By late afternoon, that twinge had grown to gnawing worry. Thomas never stayed away this long without warning her first. Their supplies needed replenishing, and they had agreed Sarah would visit O'Malley's alone while Thomas hunted. She had completed her trading efficiently, but the crowded store had made her uncomfortable. More men than usual, rough-looking strangers with hard eyes who studied her too carefully. Now, back at their camp without Thomas, details from the trading post took on new significance. A conversation she had overheard while waiting for O'Malley to weigh her herbs. Blackwood's paying good money, 200 in gold for that Apache horse thief. Got a drawing of him and everything. Sarah hastily packed essential supplies, water, jerky, her revolver, medical supplies. If something had happened to Thomas, every minute mattered. She followed his usual hunting route, moving as quietly as her limited skills allowed, searching for any sign of his passage. 2 miles from camp, she found his first tracks, the distinctive print of moccasins he had crafted himself. She followed them to a rocky overlook where he often watched for deer. There, the story written in the dirt turned ominous. Multiple boot prints, signs of struggle, a splash of blood on stone. Sarah's training as a teacher had included tracking the logical progression of ideas. Now she applied that same methodical thinking to the physical evidence before her. Thomas had been ambushed while hunting. He had fought, another smear of blood suggested successfully at first, but had been overpowered by multiple attackers. The trail continued down a ravine, no longer showing Thomas's distinctive footprints. Instead, she found drag marks where a body had been pulled, then hoofprints where the group had mounted horses. One set of prints was deeper than the others, a horse carrying two riders. Sarah followed at a careful distance, moving from cover to cover as Thomas had taught her. The trail wasn't difficult to read. The men made no attempt to hide their passage. They didn't expect to be followed. Near sunset, she spotted them. 4 men on horseback. Thomas bound and slumped across the saddle of the lead rider. From her vantage point behind a rocky outcrop, she could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the evening breeze. "Blackwood's gonna pay extra when he sees this one's got Apache marks," said dead or alive, but alive pays more. "Gonna string him up proper this time." Sarah retreated before she could be spotted. For armed men against one woman with a revolver and 6 bullets were impossible odds. She needed a different approach. Returning to camp at a run, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The bounty hunters would take Thomas to Blackwood Ranch. O'Malley had mentioned it was a 2-day ride south. If they traveled at normal speed with a prisoner, she might be able to reach the ranch first by taking a more direct route and traveling through the night. She packed with furious efficiency, taking only what was essential for the rescue and what couldn't be abandoned. Weapons, water, medicines, their few personal items. The rest she buried beneath the fire pit, eliminating evidence of their camp. As darkness fell, Sarah studied Thomas's hand-drawn map of the territory. He had marked Blackwood Ranch with a simple warning symbol, a place to be avoided at all costs. Now it was her destination. The Sarah Winters who had once taught Boston schoolchildren would never have contemplated what she now planned. That woman would have sought legal authorities, appealed to proper channels. But that Sarah was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned that justice in these territories was measured by power and prejudice, not law. This new Sarah checked her revolver methodically, tucked her knife into her boot, and slipped Thomas's spare hunting knife into her sleeve. She would not fail him as the world had failed them both. Blackwood Ranch sprawled across the valley like an empire. Sarah observed it from a ridgeline as dusk settled, counting buildings, noting patterns of movement, identifying guards. The main house stood imposingly at the center. 2 stories of wealth and ambition in a land where most sheltered beneath single adobe roofs. Surrounding it were bunkhouses, stables, corrals, and storage buildings. Men with rifles patrolled at regular intervals. This wasn't merely a ranch. It was a fortress. Sarah had arrived hours ahead of the bounty hunters by traveling without rest through punishing terrain. Now she needed to determine where they would hold Thomas. Her gaze settled on a small storage shed separated from the main buildings, solidly constructed, with a heavy door and a single barred window, perfect for holding a prisoner. As night fell completely, Sarah moved closer, using techniques Thomas had taught her. Staying downwind, utilizing natural cover, freezing in place when guards looked her way. She felt his presence in every silent step she took, as if his knowledge had become part of her. From behind a wagon, she observed the bounty hunter's arrival. Thomas was barely conscious as they dragged him from the horse. His face was bruised, dried blood matting his hair. One hunter knocked on the main house door, speaking briefly with someone inside. Money changed hands. 2 ranch hands emerged to take charge of the prisoner, hauling Thomas toward the storage shed Sarah had identified earlier. She noted with cold clarity how they struck him when he stumbled, how they laughed at his pained gasps. "Mr. Blackwood wants him fresh for tomorrow's demonstration," one hand called as they locked the shed. "Don't damage the merchandise more than it already is." The bounty hunters departed with their payment, leaving 4 armed guards patrolling the property. Sarah retreated to the ridgeline to formulate a plan. Direct confrontation was impossible. She was outnumbered and outgunned. But Thomas had once explained Apache warfare. When enemy is strong, become ghost. Strike where they do not look, vanish before they see. Sarah remembered the dry brush surrounding the ranch's perimeter. Summer heat had turned the landscape into tinder. A diversion might thin their numbers enough for her to reach Thomas. She worked methodically through the night, gathering materials and preparing multiple small fire sites at strategic points around the ranch property. Each was designed to ignite quickly but burn slowly enough to draw attention without immediately revealing its origin. Near dawn, she put her plan into action, lighting the first fire at the southernmost edge of the property. As ranch hands rushed to extinguish it, she lit another at the eastern boundary. Then another, and another. Chaos ensued. Men ran in multiple directions, shouting contradictory orders. From her vantage point, Sarah saw Blackwood himself emerge, a tall figure barking commands from the porch. 2 guards remained at their posts, but their attention was divided between their duty and the growing fires. Sarah approached the storage shed from behind, moving between patches of shadow. The lock was substantial, but the hinges were external and aged. She worked Thomas's hunting knife between the door and frame, leveraging the blade against the uppermost hinge pin. Inside, she found Thomas lying on the dirt floor, more severely beaten than she had observed from a distance. His eyes widened in disbelief when he recognized her. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice raw. "You shouldn't be here." "I go where you go," she replied, helping him to his feet. "We are family." He swayed dangerously, struggling to stand. "They took my medicine pouch," he said, touching his neck where the small leather bag had hung. "My spirit protection." There was no time to search for it. Outside, shouts indicated the diversionary fires were being controlled more quickly than Sarah had hoped. She supported Thomas's weight as they slipped out the rear of the shed and into the shadows beyond. They had barely reached the cover of an arroyo when an alarm sounded. Their escape had been discovered. Thomas stumbled, nearly falling. "Leave me," he gasped. "You can move faster alone." Sarah tightened her grip around his waist. "Not an option. They will kill you too." "Then we die together," she said firmly. "But I prefer we live. Can you make it to those rocks?" Thomas straightened with visible effort. "Yes, I know a place beyond. If we reach it." Sarah nodded. "Then we reach it, one step at a time." The mountains received them like ancient guardians, offering passage through narrow defile and hidden valleys impassable to horses. For 3 days, they pushed deeper into territory where few white settlers dared venture, Thomas guiding them despite his injuries. Each step was an act of will for him, each mile bought with sweat and silent endurance. "We're being followed," Sarah observed on the 3rd morning, noting distant dust clouds in the valley below. Thomas nodded grimly. "Blackwood's men. And there," he indicated another direction, "cavalry patrol." They were being hunted from 2 sides now, Blackwood seeking revenge, the military pursuing any Apache in the region. Their situation grew more desperate with each passing hour as Thomas's strength waned. The beating had left internal injuries that Sarah could not treat with her limited supplies. "How much farther?" she asked as they paused for Thomas to rest. 2 days, maybe 3, he replied, his breathing labored. "If we find signs." "Signs?" Thomas gestured to the landscape around them. "My people leave markers. Small things white eyes never see. Stones arranged certain way, broken branches pointing direction." As they rested beneath a juniper tree, Thomas spotted an eagle feather caught in the branches above them. With effort, he stood and carefully retrieved it. "Good sign," he said, running his fingers reverently over the feather. "Eagle is messenger between worlds. Guides lost one's home." Sarah wasn't certain if this was Apache belief or Thomas's desperate hope, but she nodded encouragingly. They needed whatever strength faith could provide. That afternoon, Thomas began identifying subtle markers. 3 stones stacked in a specific pattern. A bent sapling that wasn't natural, geometric patterns scratched into boulders that most would mistake for random marks. Each discovery renewed his determination despite his weakening condition. "My father's band passed here," he said with growing certainty. Recently, as they followed these cryptic trail signs, Thomas shared more about Apache customs and beliefs, preparing Sarah for the cultural shock that awaited her. "Women have power in Apache world," he explained. "But white women are enemies. You will face suspicion." "Will they harm me?" Sarah asked practically. "Not if I claim you as family," Thomas replied. "But they may not accept this." The reality of their situation became clearer with each passing mile. They were attempting something unprecedented, bringing a white woman into the heart of a free Apache band, one led by a chief who had never surrendered to white authority. The danger wasn't just from pursuers but potentially from their destination as well. On the 5th day, Thomas's condition deteriorated rapidly. Fever set in, his wounds showing signs of infection despite Sarah's care. They made camp in a sheltered canyon, and Sarah used the last of her medicines to combat the infection. "If I cannot continue," Thomas said during a moment of lucidity, "you must go back. Find trading post. Sanctuary at mission." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah replied with quiet firmness. "Then we both die," he said simply. Their argument was interrupted by a sound that froze them both, the soft scuff of moccasins on stone. Sarah reached for her revolver, but Thomas stayed her hand. From the shadows emerged an Apache warrior, bow half drawn, watching them with calculating eyes. Thomas spoke rapidly in Apache, his voice stronger than it had been in days. The warrior's gaze shifted between them, lingering on Sarah with obvious suspicion. More warriors appeared from concealment, surrounding them completely. Thomas continued speaking, occasionally gesturing to Sarah. One warrior stepped forward, examining Thomas more closely. Recognition dawned in his eyes. The warrior spoke a single word, "Nach." Thomas nodded, emotion breaking through his stoic expression. The warriors conferred briefly, then the first one approached Sarah directly. In halting Spanish, he said, "Woman comes, eyes covered. They will take us to the camp," Thomas translated. "But you must be blindfolded. It is their way." "Will they help you?" Sarah asked, eyeing his weakened state with concern. "Yes, medicine man will know what to do." Sarah nodded her acceptance, allowing one of the warriors to bind a cloth over her eyes. Strong hands guided her onto a horse. As they began to move, she heard Thomas speaking again in Apache, his voice carrying an authority she had never heard before, the voice of Delgadito's son reclaiming his heritage. "My father?" she heard Thomas ask in Spanish as they rode. "Does he live?" "The chief awaits," came the simple reply. When the blindfold was finally removed, Sarah blinked against the fading daylight. They had traveled for hours through terrain she could only sense. Sharp elevation changes, stream crossings, dense brush that scratched at her arms. Now they had arrived at a camp nestled in a hidden valley, invisible from the surrounding ridges. It was nothing like the stereotypical Indian villages depicted in Eastern newspapers. No teepees stood in ordered rows. Instead, dome-shaped wickiups scattered naturally among the trees, blending with the landscape. Women worked at cooking fires or scraped hides. Children paused in their play to stare at the strange procession. Thomas, or Nach as the warriors had called him, was helped from his horse by two men who treated him with obvious deference despite his weakened state. Though still feverish, he stood as straight as his injuries allowed, scanning the camp with intense focus. A murmur spread through the gathering crowd. Hostile eyes fixed on Sarah, and mothers pulled children behind their skirts. She was an intruder from an enemy world, her presence unprecedented and unwelcome. The crowd parted as a tall figure emerged from the largest wickiup. Delgadito moved with the quiet authority of absolute leadership, his weathered face impassive beneath a traditional headband. In his hand, he carried an intricately carved wooden staff adorned with eagle feathers and symbols of his status. For a moment, The chief seemed not to see Thomas, his gaze instead assessing Sarah with cold calculation. Then his eyes shifted to the young man beside her, and something flashed across his stoic features, a brief crack in his composure quickly mastered. Thomas stepped forward, speaking formal words in Apache that sounded rehearsed, remembered from childhood teachings. He swayed slightly but remained standing through sheer determination. Delgadito's response was measured, revealing nothing of the emotion that must have accompanied seeing his son returned from the dead. Protocol governed even this most personal of reunions. After the formal exchange, Thomas gestured to Sarah, explaining in Apache and then translating for her benefit. "I have told him how you found me tied to the tree, how you healed me and taught me your language, how we lived together these many months." Delgadito approached Sarah, studying her with penetrating eyes that missed nothing. To her surprise, he addressed her in accented but understandable English. Why would a white woman help an Apache? The question was direct, cutting through any pretense or diplomatic niceties. Sarah met his gaze with equal directness. "I helped a human being," she replied. "He helped me become human again." Her simple answer seemed to give the chief pause. He considered her words, then turned to confer with tribal elders who had gathered nearby. Their discussion was brief but intense, with occasional glances towards Sarah and Thomas. Finally, Delgadito announced his decision. Thomas translated for Sarah. "You may stay tonight while the council considers what to do. I will be taken to the medicine man. You will be given separate quarters." As warriors led Thomas away, he looked back at Sarah with concern. "Do not leave the wickiup they give you," he warned in English. "It is for your protection." Sarah was escorted to a small shelter at the camp's edge. A woman silently brought her a blanket and a bowl of stew, then departed without meeting her eyes. Outside, she could hear continued discussion, the tones suggesting heated debate about her presence. Through gaps in the wickiup covering, Sarah observed the camp's evening activities. Women sang as they worked, their voices lifting in harmonies that needed no translation to convey their beauty. Children were called to family fires for meals. The ordinary rhythm of community life continued despite the extraordinary circumstances of her arrival. She caught fragments of conversation carried on the evening breeze, understanding only tone where words eluded her. One voice rose occasionally above. Others, Delgadito's, she presumed, commanding immediate silence when he spoke. Sarah's thoughts turned to Thomas, wondering how he was faring with the medicine man, whether his injuries were being properly treated. Their separation after months of constant companionship left her feeling strangely vulnerable. As night deepened, Sarah considered her precarious position. If Thomas belonged here among his people, and seeing him with Delgadito, she had no doubt that he did, what would become of her? She was an outsider, tolerated only because of Thomas's intervention. If the council decided she should leave, could she find her way back to white settlements? Would she even want to? For the first time since cutting Thomas from that cottonwood tree, Sarah felt truly alone. Dawn arrived with a flurry of activity in the camp. Sarah emerged from her wickiup at the summons of a young woman who gestured for her to follow. They approached the central clearing where a council fire still smoldered from the night's deliberations. The tribe had gathered in a semicircle. At the center stood Thomas, transformed. His face was painted with traditional markings, his wounds treated with poultices that had visibly reduced the swelling. He stood taller, strength returned to his posture. Most striking was the change in his eyes, a certainty, a belonging that Sarah had never seen there before. Delgadito began a ceremony that required no translation to understand. Tribal elders applied ceremonial paint to Thomas's chest and arms, chanting rhythmically. Women brought forward a necklace similar to the one taken by the bounty hunters, placing it reverently around his neck. Thomas participated with practiced movements, as if remembering steps to a dance long forgotten. Sarah watched with complex emotions. joy for Thomas's acceptance, fear for herself, and an unexpected pang of loss. Here, he was not Thomas but Nate, son of a chief, rightful member of a proud people. The person she had come to know existed in the space between worlds, just as she now did. As the ceremony concluded, Delgadito turned to address the tribe. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, his commanding presence and the tribe's reaction made the gravity clear. When he finished speaking, all eyes turned to her. Thomas, she couldn't think of him as Nate, approached and explained, "Scouts report cavalry and ranchers converging from different directions. They have tracked us this far." "They're working together?" Sarah asked, surprised that Blackwood would cooperate with the military. "Common enemy makes unlikely allies," Thomas replied grimly. "The tribe must move immediately to winter grounds in mountains to the south. No white man has ever found this place." Sarah understood the implication. "They won't take me with them." To her surprise, Delgadito himself answered in his accented English. "The white woman may come, but few of your kind have survived our ways. The journey is hard. The life, harder." The unexpected concession stunned Sarah. Thomas's standing must be significant indeed for his father to offer this unprecedented acceptance. Thomas's face reflected the impossible choice before them. "If I stay with my people, you face dangers you cannot imagine. If I leave with you, I abandon my birthright again." For the first time since their meeting, Sarah saw him truly torn. Until now, their path had been dictated by necessity: survival, healing, escape. This choice was different. This was about identity, belonging, future. "You have found your name, your place," Sarah said gently. "I gave you what you needed. Now you must follow your path." Thomas shook his head. "You are my family too. I cannot choose between halves of my heart." A scout burst into the clearing, speaking rapidly in Apache. Delgadito barked orders, and the camp erupted into organized chaos as people began dismantling wickiups and packing essential items. "Cavalry spotted 2 hours ride away," Thomas translated. "We must decide now." Sarah made her decision in that moment, one born of love rather than fear. "I will leave alone," she said firmly. "Draw them away from your people's escape route." "No!" Thomas gripped her shoulders. "They will kill you. They want you, not me. A white woman traveling alone won't hold their interest long." Thomas turned to his father, speaking urgently in Apache. Delgadito listened, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded and responded at length. "My father suggests another way," Thomas explained. "We create diversion together, lead pursuers away from tribe, then seek sanctuary at San Xavier Mission." "The mission?" Sarah asked. "Father Ignacio protects all who come in peace. Blackwood cannot touch us on church ground, and my father's band can escape safely to winter territory." Delgadito approached Sarah directly. From around his neck, he removed a small symbol carved from antler and strung on a leather cord. He placed it around Sarah's neck with ceremonial solemnity. "Protection," Thomas translated. "No Apache will harm one who wears the chief's mark." It was more than protection, it was acceptance. Not complete, not without reservation, but real. "Tell him thank you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Thomas smiled, the first true smile since their arrival. "He understands. Now we must hurry." Parting from Delgadito carried the weight of both reunion and separation. The chief spoke final words to his son, touching his shoulder with ceremonial dignity that barely contained deeper emotion. "Return when you can. Your place remains." They traveled southwest while the tribe moved south, creating false trails to confuse pursuers. Thomas applied every skill of deception he had learned from childhood, brushing away tracks, traveling over stone, doubling back along streams. Sarah matched his caution, having absorbed his teachings over their months together. 3 days into their journey, they encountered the threat they had hoped to avoid. Blackwood's bounty hunters, 3 men with hard eyes and rifles, blocked their path through a narrow canyon. There was no time for strategy, only action. The fight was brief but violent. Thomas moved with the speed and precision of his warrior heritage, protecting Sarah even as she proved herself no helpless bystander. When it ended, Thomas had suffered a knife wound to his arm, but all 3 hunters were incapacitated. "We must hurry," Thomas said as Sarah bandaged his wound. "Others will follow." They pushed on toward San Xavier Mission, traveling day and night with minimal rest. The white dome of the mission finally appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its cross catching the late afternoon sun. Father Ignacio, a slight man with kind eyes and a steel spine, welcomed them without hesitation when Thomas explained their situation. "The church offers sanctuary to all God's children," he said simply, leading them inside the mission walls. That evening, as they rested in the mission's infirmary, news arrived that Delgadito's band had successfully escaped to their winter grounds. Blackwood's men had followed the false trails left by Thomas and Sarah, while the cavalry patrol had been recalled to Fort Bowie following Apache raids elsewhere. "Your plan worked," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. Thomas nodded, but his expression remained thoughtful. "For now, Blackwood will not forget. Can he reach us here? Not within these walls. Church sanctuary is respected even by men like Blackwood." Thomas's gaze met hers. "But we cannot remain forever." Father Ignacio offered a solution the following day. "We need teachers for our school," he explained. "Many children come here, Apache, Mexican settlers' children. They need to learn to live together, to understand each other's ways." The proposal was unexpected but fitting. Sarah would teach the settlers' children and any who wished to learn English. Thomas would serve as translator and teacher of Apache language and customs. Together, they would bridge worlds that had only known conflict. As winter yielded to spring, they established a routine at the mission. Sarah's classroom filled with children from diverse backgrounds, while Thomas worked with Father Ignacio to translate Apache texts, preserving stories that might otherwise be lost. One warm morning, Sarah found Thomas in the mission garden, carefully planting a cutting he had gathered on their journey. "A cottonwood seedling," he explained as she approached. "From the same kind of tree where you found me." Sarah knelt beside him, touching the small green shoot. "Why plant it here?" "Apache believe trees remember what happens beneath them," Thomas said, gently tamping soil around the seedling. "This one will grow with new memories, better ones." Sarah understood the symbolism, from a tree of pain and near death to a tree of new beginnings. Their journey had come full circle. "Will you ever return to your father?" she asked, the question that had lingered between them. "Someday, perhaps, when it is safer." Thomas looked toward the distant mountains. "But my place is here now, with the children, with you." From the mission church, children's voices rose in song. Apache, Mexican, and white children learning harmony together. It was a small beginning in a territory still divided by violence and prejudice, but it was real. Father Ignacio approached, smiling at their handiwork. "A fine addition to our garden," he observed. "Trees are patient teachers. They show us how to stand firm while bending with the wind." As the priest departed, Thomas reached for Sarah's hand, a gesture that had once been unthinkable between them. "You gave me a name," he said quietly. "Now we both have a place." Sarah's fingers closed around his, feeling the strength that had returned to them. The cottonwood seedling stood barely 6 inches tall, vulnerable yet determined, its tiny leaves catching the morning light. Like them, it had found fertile ground between worlds. In this borderland where cultures collided and few found peace, they had created something rare. A place where wounds could heal and new growth begin. Where a lost woman and a nameless boy had found, against all odds, a future worth embracing.